You're watching NewsX World as we continue our very special coverage of the SCO Summit in Tianjin. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit is well underway in Tianjin, where leaders from over 24 countries have gathered to deliberate on key global issues. And the latest we're tracking from the ground is that Russian President Vladimir Putin has now commenced his address at the leaders' meet. Putin has stated that understandings reached at the Alaska summit with US President Donald Trump has now opened the way to peace with Ukraine. He's reiterated Moscow's position and claimed that attempts by the West to draw Ukraine into NATO are a key cause of the crisis. Putin has added that the conflict did not arise from a Russian invasion but has stemmed from a coup d'etat in Kiev, backed by Western allies. That is not all. Putin has also stated that the root causes of the crisis in Ukraine must be addressed and security balance must be established. He has commented on the crisis, stating that Russia adheres to the principle that no country can ensure its security at the expense of another. Putin has also stated that he will inform the leaders about details from his Alaska meeting with Trump during bilateral meetings. And he's stated that he's discussed with Xi Jinping as well as other leaders of the outcomes of the summit with Trump in Alaska. He has further appreciated China as well as India's efforts to resolve the crisis in Ukraine, and he has also stated that UN principles, including respect for sovereignty of states, are still valid and unshakable today. This is a gist of the speech that Russian President Vladimir Putin has made at the SCO leaders meet in Tianjin. Meanwhile, joining us on the broadcast is Professor Veselin Popovsky. He is a professor and the Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School. He's joining us live. Thank you so much for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. Interesting statements coming in from the Russian president. He has made it very clear that Ukraine's ambitions to join NATO is a non-negotiable sticking point as far as reaching peace is concerned. Sir, can you hear me? Professor Popovsky, can you hear me?
Yes, I can talk.
Indeed. So as I was mentioning earlier, President Putin has already delivered his address. He's made it very clear that Ukraine's ambitions to join NATO is a non-negotiable sticking point as far as bringing peace is concerned. He's also further stated that he has informed the leaders in the bilateral meetings taking place on the sidelines about the outcomes of what exactly was discussed with Donald Trump in Alaska. Trump, meanwhile, has been mooting a trilateral meeting. Do you think this trilateral could catalyze in the near future?
Can I say that I'm busy, I'm speaking? I'll call you back. I will call you.
Professor Popovsky, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, basically, everything that Putin says is a lie or a manipulation. And he cheats those who call friend in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Absolutely not. Absolutely the opposite, I must say. It was NATO that refused Ukraine membership for the last 16 years. Ukraine applied for membership back in 2009 after Russian aggression in Georgia, not before that. Only when Russia committed a flagrant violation of international law, invaded Georgia in 2008, only then Ukraine applied for NATO membership. Obviously, why? To be protected from the next Russian aggression against Ukraine. And NATO said no. It's exactly the opposite. NATO refused Ukrainian membership to please Vladimir Putin for 16 years. And now Putin put this exactly into the opposite, which is absolutely incorrect. It was NATO non-acceptance of Ukraine into NATO that actually led to the Russian aggression into Ukraine. So don't listen to Putin, don't even put him on video here. Everything he says, every time, including to Donald Trump in Alaska, including to now to his friends in China, is absolute manipulation. There is no such things. And I hope that the world realizes that. Donald Trump already realized that. Took him 6-7 months. Well, for incompetent US president, it takes longer than for regular people to understand the causes of this conflict. So hopefully US administration will be also on the right side of the story, together with the Europeans, Australians, Canadians, Japanese, South Koreans, and the rest of the world.
I'd also like to rope in Mr. Glenn Grant. He is the former advisor to the Defense Minister of Ukraine. Thank you so much for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to hold a slew of bilaterals today and in the upcoming days as well. He's slated to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping. He's also slated to meet Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What are your expectations from these bilateral meetings? He said that he will inform these countries about the outcomes of his meeting with Donald Trump that was held in Alaska.
Well, as Mr. Popovsky said, it's very clear that he's only going to lie to these people. But I think that you know, when you're dealing with G, that you've got two manipulators speaking together. So any outcome that comes out of them is going to be pure fairyland. But this is an extremely dangerous time. And especially I worry about you know, Modi actually speaking to these people, because he's playing with the devil at the moment, and I think you need to understand this, because these people are not nice. And one thing I was thinking about before I came on this morning was that, you know, where do people from the Indian subcontinent go? Do they when they leave and go to work somewhere else? They go to America, they go to Britain, they go to Australia, they go to the Western world. They don't go to the places that Mr. Modi is actually going to people to speak at the moment. They're not rushing to China. And they don't, for very good reasons, because the values that Indians have are not the values that these people espouse. They're not the values that these people follow. So I think that this is a dangerous time for India, because aligning itself with I'm going to call it the axis of evil of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea is not a good thing to do. It's not a good place to be. It's not a warm place for India. So any bilateral talks that come out of Mr. Modi and Russia, they're not good. They're not going to be good things, I promise you.
Indeed, and I'd like to rope in Professor Gunaratna into the conversation as well, taking a bird's eye view at what's happening at the SCO Summit. What do you make of the optics? In fact, we've seen several visuals come in yesterday. We've seen a conversation between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping ahead of the family photo session post the dinner. Today as well, we saw the leaders of 3 of the 4 most powerful nations now being all smiles ahead of the leaders' sessions. What signal is Xi Jinping trying to send to the West via this posturing?
SCO Summit is the world's largest regional organization. Today, 3 of the most powerful leaders of the world, they are meeting at the SCO Summit. And of course, President Putin has played a very pivotal role in bringing China and India together. President Putin primarily briefed the leaders at the summit of his talks with President Trump. And I believe that we must all congratulate both the Russian and the American leaders for meeting. And I believe that it is important not to criticize that meeting, because that is the very first steps of a long journey towards an alliance that will form again between the West and the East. If no such meeting took place, Ukraine and Russia will be at continuous war. This meeting, the Alaska meeting, and also Putin's words at the SCO summit gives us hope that there can be peace in Ukraine and not war. Certainly, it's a very long journey because the Russian leaders want to make sure that there is no NATO buildup on its borders in the West. And the Western leaders must understand about this Russian concern. So there must be appreciation of the concerns of both parties, of Russia and of the West. It is only only then there can be peace. The broader agenda, the broader concerns should be understood. The war in Ukraine is just the trigger, the spark of a broader dispute between Russia and the West.
All right, quick follow-up to this. Zelensky spoke to Modi yesterday. President Zelensky had highlighted the loss of lives that had taken place in Kiev. 23 people had, civilians in fact, had tragically lost their lives in a Russian strike. And these strikes have been taking place despite talks in Alaska. And Ukraine, in President Zelensky's message particularly, he's emphasized that Ukraine is willing to come to the negotiating table, but so far we've not seen any clarity or any clear statement being given by the Kremlin to this end. Do you think Prime Minister Modi will pass on President Zelensky's message to Putin?
Certainly. But more than that, I want to share with you that President Trump is very keen to bring in Zelensky into the table, and he will do so when they meet next. Zelensky is an important man if there is going to be peace in Ukraine. Rather than talking about the loss of lives of these attacks, what is important is to work out an agreement where there is stability and security for Russia and also for the West.
All right, I'd also like to go back to Professor Popovsky. We've seen the US President Donald Trump change his tune several times over the last couple of months. Soon after he was sworn into power, he had called President Zelensky to the Oval Office where he allowed him to be humiliated. There was a lot of questionable comments that were made regarding President Zelensky's attire, something, of course, he got his lick back in the recent meeting that had taken place at the Oval Office after the Alaska Summit. But why are we seeing these moves being made by Trump? Initially, he was criticizing Zelensky rather openly. Now he's willing to provide security guarantees. What exactly is Donald Trump trying to achieve?
Well, thank you for the question, and it's a very difficult one. Every question why Donald Trump does it, what Donald Trump means, are useless because Donald Trump doesn't know why he does this. Donald Trump doesn't know what he means when he talks. It's an irrational clown that does nothing. And I totally disagree with the last speaker who put so much hope into that Alaska meeting and to this Shanghai Cooperation meeting. Absolutely not. After Alaska, we see zero development. There are talks and talks, but no action whatsoever. And this goes back to my previous point. Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace. He cannot live in peace. His only life is in war, and Ukraine is his victim. And that's why every demand the Russian put on the table is totally unacceptable. Effectively, he wants to conquer the territory he cannot conquer with his military. Do you know that for Russian, with the current advance in Donetsk, they will need 5 years to get only Donetsk region by military means. So that's why Putin is trying to use diplomacy, and Donald Trump has to achieve through negotiations what he never will achieve through his military, because his military is already totally destroyed. Half of the army is gone. 1 million soldiers are dead and injured. So Alaska is zero effect. Shanghai Cooperation Meeting is a Chinese show. We hear about this organization 1 in 5 years when it is hosted by China. We don't remember where was the last meeting of this organization. We don't remember when it was in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, or Kazakhstan. Many people don't follow. It was not on the last page of the news, the last meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, exactly because it is a Chinese show. Once in 5 years, we hear about this organization because it happened to be in China, and China makes the best to show itself in the global arena, inviting some neighbors, and nothing out of this happened afterwards. Of course, the bilateral meeting by Prime Minister Modi is important. Of course, he should pass the message to Vladimir Putin to stop the war, what he did a couple of years ago already. And that's good for India to show. India is the only democracy around that table in Tianjin. Everybody else is a dictator for life. And for that matter, that meeting is also useless. So what needs to happen is continuous support for Ukraine, hopefully by the United States administration too, and by everybody else. And India and China should reduce buying Russian oil and gas, which actually fuels the war. Money goes to Russia and to Putin's military only from selling oil and gas, which India and China buy. So the only resolution here is not to sit and talk, which has been done, by the way, over the last 7 months. There are many talks, as you mentioned, there were several meetings in the White House. All this produced very little unless US administration does exactly what the previous administration did, Biden-Harris, supporting Ukraine and severe sanctions on Vladimir and no negotiation. Don't talk to Putin whatsoever. I'm totally in the opposite opinion of your previous speakers. You need to treat Putin like Adolf Hitler was treated in the early 1940s. No other escape here.
All right. Before I go across to Mr. Grant, who's still waiting rather patiently, I believe we have the soundbite of Vladimir Putin's statement from the SCO, where we can hear him defending his stance on his war with Ukraine. Let's in fact listen into that soundbite.
Этот кризис возник не в результате нападения России на Украину, а в результате государственного переворота на Украине, который был поддержан и спровоцирован Западом.
All right, we've just heard Putin defend the war that's taking place against Ukraine. So on one hand, it seems that Russia is not backing down. On the other, it seems that Donald Trump has his eye on the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's not very subtle about it as well. So he has his personal considerations. Meanwhile, we've recently seen, Mr. Grant, defense ministers of European nations gather in Denmark. They are currently deliberating over the security guarantees that need to be outlined for Ukraine. So what must Europe do at this point? How urgent is it to outline these guarantees to ensure that there is in fact security cover that can be provided for Ukraine, since it does not seem like the attacks are going to be ending any soon?
Well, there is only one type of security guarantees that, that creates security, and that is guaranteeing to put your soldiers on the ground in Ukraine by law. In other words, you actually agree some sort of agreement with Ukraine, bilateral or whatever, as a group, and then you enshrine that in your national law, so politicians can't weaselly their way out of it. I don't see that happening. I think they're going to hope that they can do this by air cover, by other agreements, and I'm not sure that the population, that society in Ukraine will accept those things, because, for example, if you're actually looking at, as people are suggesting, a border between the Russian forces and the Ukraine forces, and Ukraine, you would need tens of thousands, 100,000 people minimum to police that border. And if it's just Ukrainians on one side, the Russians are going to keep attacking. I'll remind you that we had an agreement in Georgia, and every night the Russians move forward and push the border forward by a couple of 100 meters. And that's exactly what they'll do in Ukraine. Day by day, they will eat more ground. And the West is not going to fly planes over and attack Russia. It's just not going to happen. So there is no guarantee except European soldiers on the front line facing Russia. Actually, there's no guarantee if we look at it that way. So either we fight this out and beat Russia as we had to beat Hitler, or I'm sorry, but Putin is going to keep going forward. And when he's eaten this animal, he'll eat another one. So we've got to get realistic about this sort of thing. Peace is not on the table at the moment.
All right. With that, I would like to thank Professor Gunaratna. I'd also like to thank Professor Popovsky and Mr. Glenn Grant for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World as we continue to track developments from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.